Hi, everybody, and welcome to this live discussion on domestic violence during Domestic Violence Month. And today we're going to get to talk to some real life heroes doing incredible pro bono and volunteer work. I am Rhea Seehorn, and I play Kim Wexler on Better Call Saul, where I only get to pretend to be a lawyer doing pro bono work for those in need. So I'm thrilled today to get to talk to some of the real life people doing this kind of work. And I'm honored to stand with them this month especially, but all year round as well. So just to take a minute to talk to you guys, many of you already know this, but I think it's great to remind ourselves of the domestic violence pandemic. It's its own pandemic year round, every year, and it's not a new one. And a few statistics that I think are sobering that I know all of my panelists and many of the viewers already know, but I'd like to keep them in mind. And that is that more than 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men in the US will experience sexual violence, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner during their lifetime. And about 20% of these women and about 14% of those men experience some form of intimate violence between the ages of 11 and 17 years first, which is a lot to digest and take in. And too often domestic violence becomes lethal, and more than 600 women are killed with a firearm by their intimate partners in this country every single year, more than 600. Access to a firearm makes it 5 times more likely that the abuse will end in murder. So yet another reminder of how important the work that these people and all of their colleagues are doing so that we don't get to that place. All over the globe, there's been reports right now during the global pandemic with COVID-19 that there is a surge in domestic violence cases and reports and people being in need of help. The conditions that the pandemic have created, everyone being at home and rampant unemployment and frustrations and anxiety and fear, none of them being an excuse for domestic violence, but unfortunately all of them creating a perfect storm for a surge in it. And then on top of that, you have all these people in need, and often those that have the least are in the most need of help. And I am so proud to be pairing up with the Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles, or LAFLA, this year. And last year alone, LAFLA helped over 1,500 domestic abuse survivors through their domestic abuse court clinics. All of those, because of the pandemic, have now had to become virtual and online, and we'll hear more about that. And they also created a hotline and have continued to service their clients without interruption, which is no small feat right now. And also with us from Munger, Tolles and Olson, MTO, we have some representatives from this firm that they played a huge role in assisting the DV survivors during the pandemic, and they are one of the leading law firms to partner with LAFLA on these pro bono cases. MTO has taken on many domestic violence restraining order cases for representation. And then this summer, they assisted survivors with drafting and filing all of these restraining order applications and obtaining temporary restraining orders, which sometimes can be a lifeline to many of these survivors. Again, no small feat during a pandemic. So without further ado, I'm so proud and excited to introduce these 3 lovely ladies who are going to talk about their experiences working with domestic violence survivors and the challenges of some of their low-income clients and what they're facing as they're pursuing these legal remedies through the legal system. So please welcome Justine Schneeweiss, an attorney at LAFLA. Hi, Justine. Thank you for being here. Raquel Dominguez, associate at Munger, Tolles and Olson. Hello. And Gina Elliott, associate at MTO. Nice to have you guys here. And just a quick note before we get started with the discussion, we're hoping to have some time for questions and answers at the end for any of you. And there is a Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. So just go there and type them in, and Juliana or Sarah or someone else will help us sort through those at the end. So questions. See, normally I just get to research with books. On our show, we have some law consultants, but I've never gotten to speak to people doing the pro bono work that you guys are doing right now. I'm thrilled to be here and in awe of everything that you guys are doing. So I just wanted to ask. I have some notes for myself. I'm sorry. I'm a terrible actor. I did not memorize this, but so we're hearing. Well, I'm hearing a lot, and I know I've talked to a lot of people. They're hearing a lot about how much the pandemic is affecting people right now and making them more vulnerable to domestic violence. Are you guys seeing this with your clients? How are you seeing domestic violence being affected right now by the pandemic and the situation that we're in?
Yeah, absolutely, Ray. And first of all, thank you so much for doing this with us and raising awareness about this really important issue. We're really, really grateful. So in terms of how the pandemic has affected survivors in the ways that we've seen, there are many different ways. First, we've seen it affect people in terms of opportunity for additional abuse since folks are stuck at home. And as you mentioned in your PSA, your wonderful PSA, it created a perfect storm with people needing to be at home and rampant unemployment. Second, if abuse is occurring, there's a potential lack of access to the justice system since the courts are mainly closed. That presents some different issues, and I'll talk about that in a second. And then third, we've seen actually COVID health concerns be used as its own form of abuse.
Really?
So there are many different ways, yeah. So I wanted to talk about a few of those things. In terms of opportunity for additional abuse, many survivors obviously are stuck at home with their abusers. They're either forced to work from home or have been laid off and are now unemployed, as you said, creating a perfect storm. They have their children at home who, they have to homeschool or care for. And that kind of goes into the second issue of access to the justice system. So many survivors are having trouble accessing the assistance that they need. Previously, we would do our in-person domestic violence clinics within the courthouses. And in those situations, a survivor could come to the courthouse while their abuser was at work and while their children were at school, or they could take advantage to the courthouse daycare centers and be able to come into our clinic and we'd be able to help them in person. And now that's not the case. And so it's a lot more difficult for survivors to be able to access the help that they need. In addition, many of our survivors don't have access to technology that would make it easy for us to, or as accessible for us to be able to help them. We obviously still do, but I've had plenty of people that I've helped through the domestic violence clinic, and my colleagues have helped who didn't have access to email or didn't have a computer or didn't have a smartphone where they could take a picture of an injury or a threatening text message and then email it to us so that we could put it into the restraining order application. So all of those things, obviously because our clients are low income, we have plenty of clients in that position. And so we're not necessarily as able to, put together a restraining order as efficiently and as quickly as we were before. We're obviously doing the best that we can, but obviously the pandemic creates some issues for a lot of our clients. Also, I wanted to say that some of our clients have been hesitant to even access help because they're at home, often in close quarters with their children. I've had a couple clients who, you start a restraining order application, we're asking them questions over the phone, but then they have to hang up and then call back a couple hours later because they have to give their children, a school lesson, or they just, their children is hungry, they're hungry or something like that. So it is really difficult for our clients to be able to, gain access to justice in that regard. And then I haven't experienced this personally, but I've heard anecdotes from some of my colleagues about their abusers using COVID health concerns as a form of abuse. So we've had survivors who have had some kind of underlying health issues, and then maybe their abuser works out in the public or something and then comes home and as a form of abuse, like coughs on them or something like that. I particularly have not heard, I've not had a client like that, but I've definitely heard anecdotes about that. So that's an additional vessel to this.
That's hard to listen to. I'm So glad that you guys are sticking with it. Anybody else? Gina, Raquel?
Yeah, like Justine was saying, just an example of how people are stuck with their abusers during the pandemic. I was representing a woman this summer who has been suffering abuse, emotional abuse from her husband for many years. And she'd been supporting the household. He didn't work. And she was laid off at the beginning of the pandemic and was stuck at home 24/7 with him. And the emotional abuse just became very, very severe, and he was threatening to kill her and her children. So thankfully, she reached out to LAFLA and got help with a temporary restraining order. And then MTO was able to represent her to get a permanent restraining order. It was definitely insight into how the pandemic has changed conditions, and especially at the beginning of the pandemic when people were really isolated, how scary that is.
For sure, for sure. Raquel, how about you?
So I'm not yet admitted to the bar, so my role in all of this has been as a support person to the attorneys at MTO. But I've seen that it can be difficult for survivors to access the courthouse. Like Justine was saying, everything from transportation to childcare is interrupted, and those are critical things that a survivor needs in order to actually access the Justice Center.
Sure. Yeah, I was thinking about, there's a young woman that I was mentoring for a while, not a domestic violence case, thank God, but just being a mentor. And I know that she had to go to the library to use the computer because she did not have a computer, and I don't actually think she had internet. And she would use mine when she could, but when she wasn't with me, she had to go to the library. And I was thinking the other day about all of these men and women that are in situations where they might have contacted you with a cell phone that's been taken away or a laptop that's non-existent, and now you can't go to a public space. You can't go to a coffee shop and use the internet for free, or go to that library. So my heart goes out to these people. I told some of the people at LAFLA the other day too that I had gone on some of the sites. I was just reading and trying to educate myself some more so that I can be more of an ally and more help. And there was one of the sites that's one of the hotline sites for domestic violence victims, and this huge flashing half of the screen comes up to let you know that if you need to X out of this screen immediately, you would press this X, and that it will also clear your browser, your search browser, your search history. And I had such a lump in my throat trying to catch my breath, realizing like, oh, there's people that with everyone at home, like they're terrified to even be caught looking up help. It was just such a big reminder to me of the situation that so many of these people are in. Again, thank you for everything you're doing. I also wanted to ask how the pandemic is affecting your work as you work with these survivors, and how are you accessing them, and what do you do about that? How are you seeing people? How are you being affected through your work?
Thank you for that question, Ray. And I also just wanted to thank you so much for mentioning that you just mentioned in terms of the websites and needing to automatically X out or something like that. And I just wanted to mention that that's been a huge, that's always been the case for domestic violence agencies. But with the pandemic, and this, domestic violence transcends just restraining orders or things like that. We have government benefits, housing, immigration. We have many different things that we deal with at LAFLA. And so part of what we have done to spring into action during the pandemic has been to create a holistic needs assessment. So even if somebody who's in the housing unit is contacting a client, we have procedures in place to make sure that they're in a safe space to talk. So even though they're not necessarily looking for a restraining order, they're seeking help for another issue. That's really important, making sure they're in a safe space. And if they if the call goes out, do they want us to call them back, or is it more safe for them to call us back? So that's
I did see that on your site. It's incredible. And I know we're doing domestic violence awareness this month, but for anybody out there that wants to look up LAFLA.org, as well as MTO and all the pro bono work they're doing with them, yes, helping vets, helping displaced people out of their homes, people that lost their jobs, people being evicted, all of that. Again, I don't have enough hats to take hats off to you all. So anyway, yeah, let me know a little more about how this is affecting your work, because I know the courts are closed, right?
Yeah, so
what are people doing?
Yeah, so the courts have been closed mostly since mid-March, but they have been open for domestic violence restraining orders and kidnapping issues and some criminal issues. So they're not completely closed. Survivors and people seeking restraining orders have the option of appearing in person or appearing telephonically or through video conference through something called WebEx. It's made it a lot more difficult, obviously, because we're not physically there with the client. It just makes things, take a lot longer. Almost all services are being provided remotely by necessity. We have our domestic violence hotline. So normally when we would go into the physical clinic at the courthouse, there would, often be a line outside. And then we would just see clients one by one, but now it's all by hotline. And so just, unavoidably, things take a lot longer. And it's a lot more difficult, obviously, as I mentioned before, for clients to meaningfully access our services when they have household members in the house or children, and they don't want them to overhear. So courts are open for in-hearing persons technically, but obviously it's up to the client if they want to appear in person or remotely. There are different reasons why a client might want to appear in person or remotely. When you're in person, a judge might be able to better assess one's credibility. That's not necessarily the same, remotely, but people might have health concerns or childcare concerns. And so it's a really important conversation that we have with every client when it comes to the point of them having their DVRO hearing. And I know that Gina and Raquel have had experiences with representing clients through their hearings, so they have some helpful things to add as well.
Yeah, I could speak to this. I've seen the pandemic impact the cases I support in two major ways. One is before the hearing itself, and the other is at the hearing. Before the hearing, Justine talked about, and Ray, you did too, about how a lack of access to a smartphone or internet is hard. But in interfacing with survivors, what I come back to is we all have a hard time navigating technology when it doesn't work. But when you're already under trauma, that technology problem just becomes that much more overwhelming. It takes up that much more time in a day where you're already stressed, and that much more emotional energy when you frankly don't have any left. So things like getting the video to turn on your phone when it's not properly connecting, they just eat up time and energy that a survivor may not have to spare. And then second, there's the hearing itself. So as Justine previewed, some clients choose to go in, some don't. I actually supported a case where the client had decided to call in to the courthouse for their hearing because they didn't want to risk the exposure with COVID-19. And this was fairly early on in the pandemic when everyone was still figuring out how things worked. And so the client, the Munger, Olson, Olson attorney, and myself signed on to the phone call with the judge, and the judge was like, I require all hearing participants to appear in person. I don't accept the telephonic appearance. And so, the client, the MTO attorney, and myself, we all hung up the phone, jumped straight in the car. We were all coming from different places in Southern California and just raced into the courthouse. And I have to say that client handled it with aplomb. They did great. It was really cool to see them just get thrown this curveball and for them to continue being so courageous and advocate for themselves was really inspiring to see. Of course, on my end, it was pretty eerie to be in a courthouse that's usually bustling and to have the hallways be completely empty.
Yeah, I had a similar experience to Raquel. Well, shortly after Raquel's experience, I was representing a survivor and had just heard this about how the judge required her to come in. And I had had a really bad experience in an immigration case, actually, where I tried to do the remote calling in. The judge could barely hear me. He granted what we needed, thankfully, just kind of based on what we'd submitted in paper. But it was clear that, to me, that wasn't going to work when we were doing this domestic violence restraining order case where the judge really wants to hear a lot of information from the client directly so that she can assess what the client has gone through and the client's credibility. So I asked the client if she would feel comfortable coming in person, and she did. She was a monolingual Spanish speaker, and I do not speak Spanish. But I didn't want, we have wonderful support at MTO. We have some volunteers, a paralegal I work with, Jeanette, who translate for us usually with Spanish speakers. But I didn't want to ask anyone else to have to come into the courthouse with me because, you know, we don't want to ask any more people than necessary. It's all of our own decisions about whether we feel comfortable going into a public space right now. So I kind of just went in by myself, and my client brought her adult children, and thankfully one of them speaks English. So I was having him translate for me, and, you know, it just adds another layer of a little bit of upheaval and a little bit more stressful than already stressful situation. I was actually shocked. The courtroom itself was packed. You know, the judge was doing a lot of hearings, and she didn't have people leave the courtroom in between, like, for other people's hearings. So everyone was just sitting there the whole time. So I was quite surprised. It wasn't a great situation, but we did get a permanent restraining order. So that's really, the client was obviously really happy in the end, and that was a great outcome. But it definitely was just added stress to that situation.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, everything that you guys are saying, like, it's incredible hard work on your part, and things I'm hearing now and things that I've read and talking to people at LAFLA over the last couple of weeks. I also keep hearing about the actual stories of the survivors and some of your clients being so resourceful and so remarkable in their push and their strive to get the remarkable results that you guys can get them if they're able to have that much courage and get over all these obstacles. Do you have any of those favorite stories that you want to tell about any of those clients?
Yeah, I do. And I mentioned this earlier, but she was one of my first COVID remote domestic violence clinic clients. She was monolingual Spanish speaking, had a flip phone, did not have a smartphone, did not have access to internet or a computer or any of that. And she had small children at home, and she had just recently left her abuser, but he kept coming over to the home and, you know, all of that. We did her restraining order over the course of several days because she had to tend to her children. So it was like maybe on 10 a.m. one day, we could get a little bit done, and then it needed to be at 3 p.m. or the same day or the next day. So, you know, it requires a lot of flexibility. I think I had her mail a couple things to our office so that I could have access to it, like photos, because she was not able to email photos to me like some clients are able to. And so we completed her application. I mailed it to her, wrote on Post-its in Spanish, like exactly what she needed to sign and exactly what to do. And she physically took the restraining order application herself to Stanley Mosque Courthouse, filed it. She apparently ran into some issues. This was kind of early on where court staff might have been a little bit confused. She got a little bit of pushback with that and with the sheriffs and service. But myself and our paralegal, Marta, informed her of her rights. And over the course of a couple weeks, she just found this strength to advocate for herself and kind of push back and said, no, I know what my rights are. This is what I need to do. And she was eventually able to file the restraining order, and she got her final domestic violence restraining order after hearing. So that has been a really empowering story for us.
Oh, that makes me tear up wherever she is. Bravo, bravo. Anyone else? Raquel or Gina? Okay. So
we can't hear you, Raquel.
No, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, no. Mm-hmm.
Sorry about that. I supported a pro bono case that MTO took on for a male survivor seeking a restraining order against a female abuser. And for me, it was a great reminder that domestic violence is not just about physical domination, although it can include absolutely physical abuse. But domestic violence is about power and control over another person, and abusers are master manipulators. They use things like social isolation, picking fights with family and friends so that the survivor is cut off from their support network, or abusers will use economic control, putting themselves as the sole person on all of the bank accounts so that if a survivor wants to leave, they have no access to money. And emotional abuse. I've seen time and time again that abusers are really good at convincing a survivor that the abuse is the survivor's fault, not the abuser's fault. And so it was a great reminder that domestic violence is about power and control and is about a whole pattern of behavior.
Okay, thank you for that. What else? I have like 1,000 questions. I'm not going to be allowed to ask them all. Okay, so I did want to ask you guys, this work that you're doing. I mean, obviously during the pandemic, it has even more obstacles, but I think it's trying, pun intended, work at all times anyway. And I was just curious, what attracted the three of you to doing domestic violence work?
I've been doing similar work for a while. When I was in college, I was engaged in feminist activism. I was the chair of the feminist organization at my college, and we did, DV Awareness Month, Sexual Assault Awareness Month events, and a lot of activism, involving that. And then before law school, I volunteered for a rape and domestic violence crisis hotline for about 1.5 years. And got a lot of experience through that and just really saw like people falling through the cracks, and I just wanted to be able to do more, and that was a really big thing that made me want to do this work when I went into law school.
That's great. Anyone else?
I had started volunteering to support survivors of domestic violence prior to law school, and I've continued with this work just because every survivor that I've met has been so inspiring. The strength and resilience and grit it takes I can't step away from this work now when I've seen all that these survivors are capable of being.
I bet. And Gina, you as well, within the same question, how is doing the domestic violence pro bono work different from the other work you're doing at MTO, and how do you feel about them differently?
Yeah, it's really rewarding. It's and a really nice change from the other really important work that we do at MTO. In terms of other pro bono work, we do a lot of large litigation. Like, for example, right now, our firm's representing a lot of prisoners who are seeking release due to COVID in California from unsafe jail conditions. And that's on a large scale. And what's great about the domestic violence work is you're really working with one individual and seeing your impact so immediately. And I just love that connection with an individual client and being able to really understand that you've made a change in his or her life and that you've empowered him or her. As Raquel was saying, it's so great to be able to use the tools you learn as a lawyer to help someone. DV applications are technically, you can submit them yourself without a lawyer, but they're still kind of complicated. And, it's easy for someone who's not trained with those skills to not do it quite right. And so just knowing that with not that much work, a couple hours for a lawyer in a lot of cases, you can make a huge difference is really great. And it really reminds you why you decided to become a lawyer.
If I can add to that. We're just, at LAFLA, we're so grateful for our pro bono partners at MTO and other law firms as well. Obviously, doing everything remotely takes it takes a lot out of us, and it takes a lot longer to do things than if we were to do it physically in person. So for our pro bono partners to jump into this and help us out during the pandemic is really invaluable, and we're so grateful. I would encourage more people to help us. We're so grateful for Raquel and Gina and all of our pro bono partners. It's really been a lifeline for us and for our clients.
Agreed. I mean, I'm just a bystander listening to you guys and watching you guys, but anybody out there, if you're able to volunteer, if you're able to donate, of course, if you're in need of assistance, we also have that number up, and you can go to LAFLA.org. But if you're able to donate or help, I hope that this has the impact on some people that you guys have had on me, somebody always knew that domestic violence was a huge problem worldwide, and wanting to do more and not sure where to start. And now there's the pandemic, and we've got these barriers on top of barriers for these people, whether it's language barriers or not being able, like we said, to get to access to technology, not being able to get away from your abuser, losing your job, losing even more of your self-esteem and your sense of self than you were already losing before that. What MTO is doing, what LAFLA is doing, I hope everyone can see how important it is. I hope you guys feel how important this is. You've so touched me, and I hope I can continue to help you. I just want to thank you guys so much. Thank you for sharing all of this, and thank you for all of the work that you're doing and putting yourselves out there too, when you're also afraid to go to a courthouse or go meet with somebody, or staying up all night, or trying to do Zoom lessons with your children while you take these calls in private. Thank you. Thank you, and thank you to anybody out there who's considering donating your services or your money or your time, because it's needed. It's definitely needed. Thank you again. Thank you for the conversation. I have been forewarned that people want to ask, that you guys want to turn the tables on me and ask me some questions about my silly job. So I will take those.
Well, thank you so much, of course, for your interest and for agreeing to do this event. We really appreciate it. And thank you for the great questions and your passion and the work. Of course, you play a lawyer on this great TV show. And as lawyers, I'm sure there's a lot of lawyers watching this, we all love seeing ourselves and our work on TV, and you play one of the better, more realistic lawyer characters on TV. So we'd love to ask you a couple questions about that. So your character, Kim Wexler in Better Call Saul, is a self-made lawyer, and she starts out her career as a private law firm. What did you do to prepare for playing a lawyer, and what response, if any, have you gotten from the legal community for your character?
Well, when we first started, Vince Gilligan and Peter Gould, who created the show, they didn't necessarily know exactly where we were going with my character. They don't plot out all 5 seasons or 6 seasons in advance, so they're finding some stories as they go. And so with mine, with my character, I wanted to be able to do some research, even though I was getting sort of little breadcrumbs as we go to figure out who she was, and trying to bring my own research to it. I knew that they weren't going to do a procedural show. I knew that wasn't something that was up their alley, a typical legal procedural. So I knew it was going to be much more about the people who practice law, and maybe what practicing law and studying law does to you. And my manager, Alyssa Vradenberg, actually suggested, and she went to law school, but she suggested to me Scott Turow's book in 1972 called 1L, about first-year Harvard law students. You guys probably all read it. And as you would know, the verbiage that you learn in it, and the legalese, and the pressure cooker that it sounds like law school, is all interesting and all helpful to me. But what I really got out of that book and started me down another path was that I use a lot in my character is the question of how practicing the law can affect a person personally, as they navigate the fact that legal and illegal is not the same as moral and immoral, or ethical and unethical, and having to face those questions and deal with the possible erosion of your of your sensibilities in other areas. Because when you go into court, that doesn't matter, and it's like, well, you can't apply that to your marriage. And these kind of things. So I found all of that really, really interesting, and that's where I started with that, and then just kept going.
Yeah, that's awesome. Definitely, 1L is a place where a lot of us start, I think.
It's a really fascinating book for anybody, even if you have no interest in practicing or studying law. It was very interesting hearing him say that many people that were top of the class decided they could not practice law anyway, and you hear that about people in the medical profession as well, that they can't do it even though they have a brain for it. Somehow you guys are surviving. Thank you.
I'll admit I read that book right before starting law school, and it made me very nervous. Thankfully, it was not everything that the book had described. One of the questions that we wanted to ask you, Rhea, was about how your character develops an interest in criminal defense work and in taking on pro bono cases. One of the things I'd seen was that your character, Kim, unlike Jimmy, often acts ethically and works hard to help people and do what's right. And so I was curious about your take on your character's development and her interest in the pro bono work.
I do think, and I forgot to say to Gina, because I should say that we do have two legal assistants on the show, one in the writer's room that they confer with, and one on the ground who is a practicing lawyer in Albuquerque that talks to me about, and a woman, and she talks to me about that stuff. So they do try to be accurate when there is legalese and that kind of stuff. And we got a very high rating from Stanford Law on representation of law. You guys asked me the response. I love that I go to panel discussions for Better Call Saul sometimes, and there will be a lot of lawyers, male and female, that want to talk to me afterwards about her scenes in doc review, like highlighting things and cataloging, staying up all night and not getting paid for it and trying to get ahead and being squished out. Like, people feel very represented by seeing the legwork and not the glamour courtroom stuff all the time. And that feels great. That feels great to me, to represent hard work like that. And everything that I was just saying about the 1L is part of the answer, as that was my launching pad. It's part of my answer for you, Raquel, which is at this point in this series, or even the season before last, when she started wanting to do pro bono work, I think it is a direct answer to the question of her eroding her feeling of her own erosion ethically and morally, and asking herself, is this what I wanted to do? Gina, when you talked about if I get to do this with my law degree, and all of you spoke to it, Raquel and Justine as well, that when this is how you're applying your law degree and staying up all night is to help some survivor get away from an abuser, or help someone not be evicted, or help a terrified immigrant, there's a direct payoff. Kim Wexler is helping someone populate the world with banks and is struggling a little bit with, like, that was not the plan. And so I think the pro bono work is in response to that. And I did find out too that, like, apparently that's a thing. Not just what you guys are doing, but I did some research when she started taking that turn on the show, and found out that there are many corporate and tax lawyers and entertainment lawyers who do pro bono work to balance out their soul when they go to bed at night.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we do. I mean, we at LAFLA have some pro bono partners who have told us that, doing the pro bono work for us, be it, domestic violence or immigration or housing or whatever, that's part of what helps them get out of bed at night, or in the morning. So we're really
sometimes at night, depending on if you're pulling an all-nighter.
Yeah, that's true. So I also had a question for you, if you don't mind, Rhea. So when your character in Better Call Saul, we mostly see Kim in the context of, like, colleagues, aside from her scenes with Jimmy and the occasional phone call to old friends and contacts, but we don't necessarily see her with friends or family. And there's an old saying that the law is a jealous mistress. So I was wondering, do you have a sense of whether we're supposed to think that the law is getting in the way of her social relationships, or are we just seeing a slice of Kim's life, or is there more to it?
The law, what is that? I gotta get a pen. The law is a jealous mistress. Like this. If you love what you do, because you could say the same about acting, writing, directing, the professions that I'm around. If you love what you do, it's another person in the relationship. I think that Kim was a loner before she started practicing. I think she's definitely a loner, and I think that was before she started practicing law. But I think that that is part of the attraction to her of practicing law, that you do want to do it as a collaborative team effort at times during cases, and you guys are all in situations where you need to collaborate and cooperate. But that kind of like digging for something and trying to solve something on your own, and knowing that you are the captain of your own ship, I think was attractive to her, and is part of the reason that she was attracted to practicing law. That and backstory stuff, and wanting to right the wrongs in the world, and thinking that she can somehow tip the scales just a little bit in favor of those that are deserving, which of course is a dangerous way to be looking at the law, which is why she's in a little bit of trouble right now. But I think it was a perfect fit for her, and we've seen her get into trouble and even get in a car wreck because she's so adamant to not accept any help. And that's something that I understood as a woman, that I thought would apply to also being a woman practicing law. As a woman, I completely understand. And actually, male and female right now, when I talk to people, like when you're trying to get a foot in the middle class, thinking that you can pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, if you've even had the pleasure and the luxury of being given boots, it's very attractive, and it feels safer than, God help you, if you have to depend on someone else. But it can be a dangerous tipping point, and that's what we saw happen to her. But again, as a woman, I completely understood why, especially when you're talking in a law firm, a private law firm, in the 90s, at that time, or was it 2000? I guess it was 2000, 99, 2000, in Albuquerque, and she's surrounded by mostly men, and I could completely understand why she would not want any help, that she would need to say, I did this myself, as I'm sure you guys would understand.
Well said and understandable.
So I think we should open it up to other people's questions. And I think people are like, let's see, are they doing it through the chat room? I'm looking. Oh, okay. Raquel, here's a question for you. Do you feel that psychological abuse and the physical abuse have the same impact? And if not, what causes the longer term damage?
I think here it comes back to what I was talking about a little earlier, about how domestic violence is this whole range of behaviors that too often we try and pigeonhole it into being just, punching or hitting or kicking, just those physical acts that are really easy for us to understand, when in reality it is a whole pattern. Oftentimes by the time a relationship devolves into physical abuse, there's already been so much emotional abuse leading up to it, so that the survivor doesn't feel comfortable reaching out for help at the moment that it turns physically abusive. So unfortunately, my answer is a sort of non-answer, in that I really believe that domestic violence is a whole range of behaviors and a pattern of manipulative behaviors. And they all, in their own way, have a very lasting effect.
I wanted to ask to all of you guys, how do you try to maintain that in-person connection that you can't do right now? Because I would imagine that some of these survivors are in a place where it's hard to admit what's going on, and do they want to do Zoom stuff with you, or are they able to write to you? Like, how are you getting, I guess I'm looking for, like, how are you getting that human connection to help people that I think are probably coming from a pretty scared place?
So in my experience, obviously it doesn't compare to, being right next to a survivor physically in our courthouse clinics. And it really just depends on their personal situation. Most of the time, the clients that I've worked with have not been comfortable with Zoom, either that or they don't have the technology for it. And so we need to do it over the phone. We also do, as part of our work, we have these partnerships with domestic violence shelters throughout Los Angeles. And so I do my shelter clinic, and it's pretty much always by phone. We just have to do the best they can. Sometimes, they're more comfortable via email, and it's, they don't want people in their household to overhear things. But when we do it over the phone, I mean, you're losing a lot of the potential rapport, but you just have to be kind and friendly, and just let them know that they're in a safe space, and if at any point they want to stop talking, that's totally fine. So it's definitely more difficult to build that kind of rapport over the phone or via email than it is in person.
Mm-hmm. And if someone is calling you, are you necessarily involving the police, or that is a separate decision on their part?
That's completely not our decision. If they, have recently experienced, an incident of abuse, we might suggest it, but it's absolutely their decision. It's also important to note that for certain folks, it might not be the best or the most trustworthy, measure to take to call the police. I come from a certain privilege where I might be able to have more trust in the police than other people do. And especially with things that have happened this year, I think it's really important to note that not every survivor necessarily feels comfortable calling the police. I've also had a situation where I actually overheard over the phone a client being attacked, but it is not my place to make that decision for her or for him. So
I think that's a great point to make, and I wanted people to know that too. That calling you guys and calling these hotlines is not the same thing as like you're automatically going to have police at your house. Those are separate decisions. But calling you guys is something they could do safely. It looks like somebody asked a version of what I just asked about how do you deal with getting the intimate details and talking to them. But they also want to know, how do you approach your self-care while you're trying to do all of this? Gina, you're not talking. Gina, what do you do about self-care?
Yeah, I mean, it can be really hard. I think talking to colleagues about the cases you're working on and the really hard things you're hearing about is really important. And so, I think we're all struggling with a remote work environment where we're not necessarily seeing our colleagues in person and having those conversations about, wow, I had a really heavy day. I was talking to this woman and she had a really hard story. So I think trying to maintain those connections, even in a remote environment, is really important. And of course, recognizing that it's not the same as suffering trauma or suffering firsthand trauma to hear the stories, but it does impact you as well. And you should recognize that.
Yeah. Do you guys talk to each other regularly so that you do feel like you have a support system?
And I talk to a lot of my colleagues at the firm who do different types of pro bono work. I'm sure Justine can talk about what they do at LAFLA.
Yeah, so previously we would be able to just vent to each other in the hallway or something like that, and that makes you feel better. After a long, DV clinic hotline day, I try to get some exercise, take a walk, and I've started more recently to just have these venting sessions with my colleagues, and we can just kind of talk about what we're going through. It's also just important to know that even though this is difficult work for us, we get so much strength and resilience from our clients and seeing how resilient they are. So that is a huge source of strength. But I think just, talking to our coworkers and getting some fresh air is really important right now.
That's great. So someone wants to know, how has the presence of children in the home with survivors complicated the cases you are handling? Are there special issues you are seeing because children have to stay home during the pandemic?
Yeah, I've encountered that issue plenty of times. It's mostly kind of just a piecemeal situation. So normally when somebody comes into the clinic and I can spend 2 hours with them just directly, we're able to get it done. But now it's just very piecemeal. So it might be, they have 30 minutes to talk over the phone, and then an hour later, they're able to email a couple photos, and then 3 hours later, they're able to have a phone call again. So it's kind of you just have to make it work. And things take a lot longer than they did before, obviously, because you don't have that compacted, 2 hours or so of time. So it just takes patience and flexibility, I would say.
Okay, I think that is the end of our questions, but I did want to thank everybody again and remind everyone that it is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So do yourself a favor and look up LAFLA.org, or wait, I'm going to say, so it's MTO. Tell me how to say the first one. Is it Munger? Munger, Olson, Olson, right? Okay, I wanted to make sure I said the first name. Munger, Olson, Olson. And see what you could do. See how you can help. Please, if you actually need the assistance, do call. I'm going to say these numbers again, although I know you guys are putting them up. If you're in need of legal assistance, you can contact LAFLA's hotline at 1-800-399-4529. And if you want information about how you can help or how you can get involved, or you just want to be inspired, please go to LAFLA, the Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles's website, www.lafla.org. And I want to thank Gina Elliott, Raquel Dominguez, and Justine Schneeweiss again. And thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Ray.
Thank you.
And everyone.
This was fun.
All right. Thank you so much.
Everyone.
And thanks to all the panelists for being here.
Thank you for participating. Bye.
All right.